Hey guys.
Hey, Alex.
Okay, I said, we are going to continue this cloud briefing series we have, and I chose a topic which I'm really interested about, and serverless in OCI, right? We're talking a lot lately about cloud native, and serverless is something which is going to change the way you see code and the way you deploy code when it comes to public cloud services. And not only, we'll see with what Oracle has to offer. What do you think about the topic?
Quite interesting.
Then let's go ahead and start the presentation as it was prepared. So, serverless. We talk a lot about serverless, and we have a lot of serverless services right now. Autonomous itself is a serverless offering, which means what? It means that you don't need to care about the operational stuff. You have a database when we are talking about autonomous, which handles the operation part itself. You just are going to consume it. When you're talking about serverless computing, it's pretty much the same thing. You care about the code, but you don't care about how the code is going to be deployed, how the code execution is going to be handled, how the application itself is going to be scaled, right? You're just taking care of the code, and the rest of it is being managed by the service provider or by the solution which you are using.
Yeah, so sounds good, Alex. So what actually, Oracle is offering for a serverless, area? We have, I think they have so many things, right?
Yeah. Well, when we talk about Oracle Cloud, I already mentioned autonomous, and we have other serverless offerings, which means that you don't need to care about the administration of that stuff. But when you're talking about code and serverless computing, we are talking mainly about this thing, FN project, which was released, I think it was announced back in 2017 at the Java Code 1 conference. And it's basically what it says here in front of you on the slide. It's an open source container native serverless platform that you can run anywhere, any cloud or on premise. There are a bunch of service providers out there who are offering their own serverless solution. But what is very unique with FN, being an open source, you can basically run it anywhere. You can deploy it on your laptop for development purposes. You can run it in your existing data center or on your servers, or you can even install it on compute shapes, on compute instances in other cloud providers' offerings, right? So this is why FN project is very unique, because it comes as an open source project which you can manage, or you can have it as a managed service and don't care about any of the stuff what is going underneath in Oracle Cloud as Oracle Functions. And we have support for a lot of most of the popular programming languages, things like Go, Java, Node.js, Ruby, Python, and so on.
Great. So you mentioned about serverless. You discussed a little about containers and how everybody's talking about those technologies these days. But what is the relationship between those two technologies, serverless and containers?
Yeah, got it. Great question. Well, we need to think about why are we using containers today and why containers are so popular. We are talking about a different architecture, talking mostly about microservices. You are using containers to package basically services which have a specific purpose. You have this kind of container approach when you have multiple microservices collaborating and working together to achieve the end goal. So this is why would you use containers. What FN project does, it takes another step further, and basically it's going to allow you to just care about the code. And what is going to happen in the back is going to take your code, put it in a container, run it somewhere where you have Docker engine, and that's completely out of your hands. You don't need to care about it. So why we are saying that FN project is a container native serverless platform is because this entire packaging the code into containers in the end is handled by the FN project. So this would be the relation. Each function is running in a container.
I love abstraction.
So Alex, what is it required to start using FN project? What about components of local development, configured, etc.?
Basically, you need the FN server, which in the end is just a Docker image which is going to run in your environment. FN server comes as a container, so you need to have Docker engine installed. And that's pretty much it. When we are talking about using it in Oracle Cloud as Oracle Functions, you will need also to have properly configured Oracle CLI tool, right? So you should be able from your development environment to integrate with your tenancy in Oracle Cloud. But that's pretty much it. And let me jump to the console and show you exactly how this is done. Okay, guys. So what we have here in front of you, it's my development environment where I have everything configured. but let's understand a little bit what we already discussed, right? So I'm going to check what kind of containers are running on my in my environment, and as you can see, there is none. Docker engine is installed, we can run it, but there is nothing running here. If I'm going to start the FN server, you will see that you interact with FN project and with FN server by FN tool, FN CLI tool, right? So right now we started the FN server. FN server is ready to accept our queries or to take actions from our FN CLI here in my local development. If I'm going to check again what kind of services, oh sorry, let me clear this one. What kind of services, what kind of containers are running, you will see that this time with FN server started, we have a Docker engine who's waiting for our commands, for our queries. Once you have this up and running, you are ready to start building your code using the FN server.
So basically, you're mentioning that in functions, we only care about the code, right?
Yep.
And here we see that is Docker container involved. The containers need to be orchestrated, created, and so on. What is why do we need Docker containers, right? When we have functions.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, in the end, with our serverless approach, you will have containers running, but this is going to happen in the back. Okay. As Theo said, there is an abstraction layer, right? So we are going to one step further. Let me show you, for example, how easy it is to create a function and to put that hello world, a simple function, a simple task, to put it in a container and running it with FN, right? So, for example, I'm going to create here a folder for my project, and I will try to use the same name. I'm going to call it FN Logging MySQL test. Okay, and what you need to do is to initiate your function. So this is everything you need to do in order to have your template, to have your folder, creating the right structure in order to start building your code. And I'm going to choose Python, but as I mentioned, there are multiple, there are a lot of solutions, there are a lot of programming languages supported. So what we will find in this folder, we'll find the function body, the func.py file, the function configuration file, YAML, and requirements, right? So when we have our Python code, we will have some modules which are required to run. One of them is FDK, and this is basically installed by default when I initiate the function. You can add others. If you want to invoke and to embed in your code multiple modules, you can have them put here in requirements. And what is going to happen when we are going to deploy our application, those modules are going to be pre-installed in the container, right? Let me open the function body, right? So it's a simple function. It's a hello world, which takes in JSON formatted the name, right? What we sent. What is going to return is going to, again, a JSON which is going to say hello, and it's going to input here the name we are basically sending it, right? It's a very simple thing. We have the function configuration file, and we are going to take a look at this one later. And we have the requirements. So the only requirement listed here is the FDK library, right? Which is imported here from FDK import response. That's it. So one thing we need to make sure is that we are targeting the right environment. So I'm working against the development environment here. In FN project terminology, this is called context. And if I'm going to list the context, you will see that I have here two contexts configured. One is pointing to my Oracle Cloud tenancy. So if I would like to deploy my application to functions, then I would have to use the first one. The second one is using my my default, which is the dev environment here, where I have the FN server running, right? So you can see I'm using this one. So all I have to do now is to deploy by inputting the app name, FN Logging MySQL. And this is what is going to happen. If you pay a close attention here, what is going to happen? It's going to take my code, put it in a Docker image, which is going to be stored locally, and now I have the function up and running. If I'm going to list the functions, yeah. Okay, so we have our function here. It's already deployed. So what we can do now is to invoke it. In order to invoke it here in our development environment, we need to do it like this. FN invoke, we put the application name, which is in our case FN Logging MySQL. And again, we need to point to the function because one application can handle multiple functions, right?
FN logging.
MySQL test. Yeah, there is a typo here. Okay, so we have our hello world response. Our application is running, and it's running here locally on our environment. This is basically what you need to do in order to get started with FN.
Okay, so basically it works the same in Oracle Cloud, right?
Yes, when we are going to speak about working with Oracle Cloud, we just need to use a different context. I'm going to change the context to our tenancy. And right now I'm ready to deploy. If I'm going to put the same thing, fn deploy, the same command as I did already, I'm going to point to the same application, supposing that this exists in Oracle Cloud. If not, you need to create it. What's going to happen? It's going to go through the same steps, right? Build the image, deploy it in Oracle Cloud, and it's going to be ready to answer this time from Oracle Cloud and not from my dev environment.
Great, Alex. So how the config file look like?
Okay, we can take a look here. As you can see, this came as a template, but there are multiple options here you can put in the configuration file. First of all, and the most important, you will have the name of the function. Here you put the name of the function. By default, it is inheriting the name of the folder, but you can change that one if you want. Second of all, the version. You will start with version 1, and it's whenever you deploy it, it's going to grow incrementally, right? We have also the runtime and also the memory. But let me open the slide to get a better look at the reference configuration file. Okay, so this is how the reference looks like, right? As I said, you have the run image if you want to mention it, the build image, the memory which is going to be allocated, things like timeout. So the container, if it's not going to respond in a certain time, is going to be stopped. And as you can see, we can also have things like triggers and configuration values passed here.
So what parameters you really need to pass in this file?
It depends. So your function, most likely, for example, in our case, we are using an application which connects to a database in the backend, to a MySQL database in the backend, right? So I need to pass configuration string, or basically username, database name, password, and so on. You can do it in code, but you would not. You want your code to be reusable, so you don't want to store credentials there. And this is one thing. This is one way to achieve that, to pass certain parameters to your to your function. But in order to get here in more details about how everything works, I think we need to go and check some definitions and to see exactly how how Oracle works and how it organizes the functions. Okay, so we have these things. This is a logical way to see functions. And this is a specific terminology. We have applications, we have functions, invocations, and triggers. So what is applications? Application is a group of functions, which means that in a single logical space, you can have multiple functions. So for example, in our application, we are trying to get and connect to a database, to a MySQL database in the back. We have a function which is going to list the content of our database, but in the same time, we will have another function who's going to insert queries, we're going to insert rows in our database. So it's a single application. The end goal is the same, but I'm going to have specific functions for each task, right? Why would you do that? In order to separate, for example, development of certain functions. I can start working and updating my list function while all the others are working independently. Working with applications is very good. It's a very good way in order to handle also the context. Getting back to your question, I can pass parameters which are going to be shared together by the functions of the same application. Let me go to the console and show you that. So in Oracle Cloud, we will need to go here to Developer Services. And under Developer Services, we will find functions. The first thing you need to do is to create an application. This is the first step. And this is basically the folder, if you want, which is going to store your functions further. So we are using the FN logging MySQL, which already exists, of course. And as you can see, we already have here multiple functions inside the same application. You are asking how we can pass parameters. There is this thing called configuration. If I go to configuration, you will see that I already configured some key value families, right? So I'm passing the database value and I give the value for that parameter. This is passed as a single JSON file. So if I'm going to go right now and check for a specific function, because I'm working at application level now, but when I'm going to go to a list, to one of the functions inside my application and go back to configuration, you will see that those values are present here and can be used, and they are inherited from the application level. So you can pass parameters either at function level or application level. This is very useful to share the same information with all the functions part of your same application. So this is another way to do it.
So Alex, passing parameters through config files is the best practice?
I would say no. I think it's better you would not want to store in the in static files specific data, right? So for example, database credentials, that's a no-go. It's not a good idea to store the connection string and the connection details for your database in a static file. I think the better approach would be here to use this kind of configuration and to pass the context to the function.
Look, Alex, so you have your function here. You created your function, and I'm not sure how can you actually expose it to the publicly available.
Okay.
What is the way?
Okay, let me open back the slide, because we are referring now to invocations, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so invocations. There are multiple ways in order to use this function and to invoke it. We have the FM project CLI, and this is what I did in my development environment. I also did it. I can do it for functions which are running in Oracle Cloud. We have the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure SDKs which are supporting this option. Or we have the option to have other Oracle Cloud services invoking this function. So for example, object storage, when you put an image in a bucket, then you have the option to trigger these kind of functions which can do a certain action. If you want to expose it publicly, we will need to take a look on a different service, which we are not going to cover today. It is configured in our application, but we are just not going to get into details on that. It's called API Gateway. And then you can publicly expose the function to your users. Let's take a look, because I realized we haven't so far. Let's take a look at how everything is put together, right? So I've tried on this slide to put everything together to understand what is exactly happening in the back. Starting from FN, from FN CLI, when you're putting there the command of FN deploy, what is going to happen? Based on the configuration file which are passing in func.yaml file, we are going to create the Docker image, which is going to get bumped if already existed or get created in the dev environment. And then, if we're talking about Oracle functions, the image, the container is going to be pushed to OCI registry. Once it is in OCI registry, the same configuration file in which we are saying, how much memory is going to get allocated, what is going to be the entry point, and so on. It's going to deploy this. This function in your virtual cloud network, because you need to configure, and you have the option to configure your instance, which is going to run the functions in the VCN you already configured, running close or in the same way as your compute does or any other kind of Oracle Cloud service. This will run as a container in an instance, and it's going to be ready to be invoked. How it's going to be invoked? I already mentioned FNCLI, public access via, for example, API Gateway using another service, OCI CLI or SDKs. There are multiple ways of doing that.
Talking about invocation, triggers seem to be a very useful tool. Can you give an example? When would you use triggers?
Yeah, okay, so triggers are closely correlated with what we know by event-driven computing, right? So trying to automate stuff, it's not only about DevOps and finding the tools in order to take out the human errors and do things very quickly. It's also a way in order to make a specific action to be triggered as a result of a different action there somewhere in the system. So I was giving this example with object storage, right? It can be when you upload something, we need to trigger a function which is going to do something else. Or you can, for example, trigger an action like sending an email or getting you notified. So event-driven is really interesting, and you need to have a very good, this is something which Oracle does, to have a very good integration between the services in the cloud in order to have this kind of possibility to trigger specific events based on what is going on there in the cloud account.
Right, good. And how do you keep track of the execution of functions? I mean, when all this mechanism runs, do you have a way to keep track of what's going on?
Yeah, so although it is abstracted, you still have action, or you still have access to see, for example, what is the execution time, what is the response time. Let me check, for example, here, going back to the console. If you go on application level, you will see that we have this kind of tab where it says metrics. I don't have values here in the last hour because I haven't invoked it, but if I'm going to check, for example, if I'm going to take a look back in time, you will see that in last 90 days, we are able to monitor and basically to understand how many times the function was invoked. But we also have something very interesting, which was recently introduced, or actually it was recently enhanced in Oracle Cloud, which is the logs. As you can see here, if I'm going to check on my function level, I basically activated the logs for this function, which means what? Which means that my function, whenever I'm going to call it, is going to save their logs in OCI Logging. This is a new tool which enables you to keep in the same place all the audit, service logs coming from your traffic in Oracle Cloud and so on.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so getting back to the code, this is quite simple. It's just a Python code which connects to a MySQL database running in Oracle Cloud. It's a select query, right? It's retrieving some values and it's printing it back as a JSON formatted file. Let me actually invoke it and see how it goes. So again, if I want to invoke it, it's quite simple from fn CLI. I just need to put the name of the application. So fn invoke fn logging MySQL and put the name of the function itself. fn logging MySQL list. What should I receive? It's a JSON formatted list of the what the table contains. And in our case, it's a list of solution engineers, so we should find ourselves there in the list. What you see here, it's basically quite a long time to respond, right? And this is because this function was not invoked since a while. This is happening only the first time when you are invoking it. So you see, we got a response, but the execution time was quite long. If I'm going to invoke it the second time, the response is going to come up much faster. And now we should have a predictable experience, right? If I'm going to check the execution time after the metrics are updated, you will see that the first invocation is going to be longer, but the other ones are going to be more faster. And getting back to the code, what I'm doing here, I want to publish, so after each section, after I connect to the database, for example, I want to print a log. I want to save a log that my function connected successfully to the database. And this is what I'm doing. All you need to do is just to print it. Yeah. So I'm printing to the console, connected to MySQL database. If I'm going to go now and here in OCI logging, check my log group. Okay, I will need to go back in time. What you will see are exactly the logs which are being pushed by the function. So result fetch from database connected to MySQL database. These logs, it's a CNCF initiative and it's a standard. And what info you will find here, you'll find things like function ID. So basically the ID of the function which got invoked, which produced this result, the message itself, and a lot of informations like things like compartment, source, things like that. So OCI logging, besides the metrics in order to track the execution time and who invoked how many times the functions, that's a very good source in order to troubleshoot and to keep an eye on the performance of your application, how everything works together.
Alex, are there any limitations regarding the execution of functions we should be aware of them?
Yes. So again, functions and serverless actually in general, it's not meant to replace containers or to replace virtual machines. There are specific use cases for all of them. I would not use serverless for time requiring tasks, so processing big amount of data and so on. There are some limitations and these are by design. So for example, there is a limitation when it comes to the quantity of data which can be passed to a function or the execution time. This can all be found in the documentation of the service.
How is it difficult or complicated to publish logs using OCI logging?
We are talking about different kind of logs. We already had a service which was called Audit, which stored audit logs. So basically it was keeping track who's doing what in your cloud account. But with OCI logging now, which is based on FluentD, we have the option not to track only the audit logs, but we have the option to track the service logs, which are activated on service level, like what we did in functions, or to have custom logs which are any kind of logs being sent from doesn't matter where by installing a management agent on the source. How easy it is? It's quite easy. All the services in Oracle Cloud are integrated with logging. And if you are talking specifically about custom logs, you will just need to install an agent on the source of that log, either an application. You need to install it at operating system level.
Alex, but is it possible to integrate multiple log sources and expose them in a, let's say, in a graphical way, in a dashboard style? How this can be done, if it can be done? Yeah.
So with the release of logging, we released another service which is called logging analytics, and that can be used exactly for the purpose you mentioned, right? There are some logging by itself has some capabilities. So for example, you can search logs using either the logging groups you already created. You have the option to use the console directly or to use the API in order to track some specific logs. You have also the option by using what is called Service Connector Hub to take and move your data from OCI Logging Service to external sources. And we have a very strong querying language in order to do that. So you can filter basically on the content of the log, right? So it's very powerful on itself. But indeed, if you would like to take an extra step and to have an integration, to build some dashboards, really cool dashboards in order to track, maybe to have a 360 overview of your environment, then we need to take a look on logging analytics, and this is exactly what we're planning to do for the next time. What we are going to do next time, we're going to talk about API gateway, right? How it's going to work everything, how it's going to work with what we've already prepared. We're going to take a look at MySQL database and logging analytics. How we're going to do that after our 2 sessions, we'll have the third one in which we put together everything and take a look at how our simple application looks like.
Great.
Fantastic. We love functions.
We love it, yeah. We love serverless.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, guys.
This is really good, amazing. Thank you.
Thanks
Enjoy.
a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.